I just want to give it up to Experimental Sound Studio and the Options series. Shanta Narula is here next week, I think. So come out for that. I'm assuming Lily will be conducting the interview. The one thing I would like to do a short, as if you didn't just hear so much from Jaribu, a short introduction and just say that Jaribu is probably one of the most generous and giving musicians I've ever worked with. I have the pleasure of having seen him when I was a wee child, when he was part of Griot Galaxy, which created some of the most bouncy and joyous complexity I've ever heard or seen live or on record. The record Kins features the tune Androgyny, in which there's a clip from 1984 on YouTube, which I can't. If you haven't heard enough today, go home and immediately also search that clip, which will be equally mind-blowing. It's probably the highest level of music auguring in and proffering some of the most refined mixed meter playing that you will ever see, and also just joy, lots of joy. As you saw from the performance now, a lot of happiness and warmth and joy inside the music, which is not always something that we find inside of free music. Griot, their first record, Kins, was recently repressed by Jack White's Third Man Records, so it is available for the first time in a very long time. Kins articulates so much futurity that it could be its own genre, and it's unique to the time because it's unbelievably funky without being about the one. In addition to Griot Galaxy, Jaribu Shahid has performed and recorded at long intervals with the following artists: Sun Ra, appearing on the CD Somewhere Else; Geri Allen on several dates; James Carter, including the records Jurassic Classics and In Carterian Fashion; David Murray, The Devil Tried to Kill Me; and with Roscoe Mitchell in his sound ensemble, The Note Factory, as well, including Snurdy McGurdy and Her Dancing Shoes and This Dance is for Steve McCall. In addition, he occupied, though to occupy is likely not the best word, let's say populate, he populated the role of bassist Malachi Favors after his passing in the Art Ensemble of Chicago. I've had the great pleasure of working on music with Jaribu the last 2 years and have had more concentrated bursts of learning happen in those 2 years than has occurred for me in years. So let's give it up once again for Jaribu Shahid. So just to start with some of the things that were happening in Michigan and Detroit in the time, can you talk a little bit about the Creative Arts Collective and how you get hooked up with Roscoe?
Roscoe had a residency at Eastern Michigan in Lansing, Michigan State. No, Eastern Michigan. Sorry, I just got finished playing. I'm always a little... And so he created the Creative Arts Collective, and when he left that residency, Spencer Bearfield and the rest of the guys kept the organization going in Detroit. And they sponsored a series of concerts that we were working in, and that's where I met Roscoe. We did concerts with Braxton, Henry Threadgill, Oliver Lake, Abdul Wadud, and Anthony Davis. I mean, just a whole bunch of people I probably wouldn't have met any other way. So I'm very grateful to that organization for sponsoring those. The other thing that it did was it allowed me to do concerts very early in my development. A lot of people never get out of these bars, and they never have a situation where you can actually shape sound and hear everything you're supposed to hear. And if you, it's akin to a painter who's never had a clean canvas. It's what happens if you're a musician and you never get out of them bars. You never hear stuff the way you want to hear it. You can never shape the music the way you want to shape it. It always has to be at a certain volume, so you can't decide. You know, to me, somebody dictating your dynamic, I'd rather they move my finger to a different note as far as the imposition that is. And having to treat it a certain way because of the room that you're in. So if you get to do real concerts in good spaces good piano, good sound, or hopefully in rooms that don't really need a lot of sound, then you learn so much more than, because I know some wonderful musicians that would never screw up in any other way, who are completely oblivious as to how to get a good balance and how to get, because they're so used to situations that don't help them do that. So that it's automatic pilot, they're screaming at the sound dude when it's often the stuff that they don't know that's messing the stuff up. You know, if your monitor is twice as loud as the whole band's supposed to be, it's your fault, not their fault. So I used to do sound with, you know, for David with the cats, and I spent as much time making sure the musicians understood and obeyed the parameters that the room sets up for you. You have to listen for, I mean, in a nutshell, it's does everyone care about how the whole thing sounds? Are you playing in such a way that you care about the whole thing is going? For instance, if the only thing you care about is what you're doing, it's like, I think it was Max Roach or something. It's like theater. You can step on somebody's line. Maybe it's somebody else's time to talk. You know, I think if you play for a whole evening, you get a chance to show people what you can do. And there's so many people that just, the first 8 bars, it's everything. You're like, let's see what happens with this. Let's see if we can get there together. You know, Duke Ellington said it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. I tell people it don't mean a thing if we don't get there together. The cat is like, you're like, wait a minute, why don't you find out what's happening with the music?
Speaking of together, since you worked with Tani for such a long time, Tani Tabal, do you meet him in the CAC, or did you already know him?
I knew him. He moved to Detroit from Chicago. One of our many hookups where we were able to develop because of Chicago was Tani from here, the stuff he did with the AACM, and mostly the stuff he did with Phil Coran, which is a name that I say all the time because too many people have no idea how important he was, and not even who he was. I'm talking about people coming out of these jazz programs that are supposed to have a rounded education who don't even know certain names. I'm not saying that they should play that way if they choose to or not to, but it's certainly a part of the, I think it was, how many years ago we participated in the 50th anniversary of the AACM. So how long does it take for something to be a tradition? You know, for the Jazz Police, who, you know, it's not, if it doesn't sound like it came from New Orleans through bebop, it ain't jazz. It's absolutely absurd. So yes, that hookup, Chicago was a very strong influence. Sun Ra and the Arkestra, Tani had already played with Sun Ra before I did. And it was so funny. The first time I saw Tani playing, he was with the Arkestra, and I'm in the audience, and here's a guy just sitting there like this. I couldn't tell he was playing because everything was here. It wasn't this. He was just sitting there, cheeing up.
And what year would this have been?
Oh my God! It was before I played with Ross, so I wasn't thinking. I can guess, 76, 77.
And then when does Griot start?
Well, Griot had already been a trio with Farouk Zibay as the leader, Abdul Daoud Khafiz on bass, and Tariq Abdul Samad on drums. And wonderful trio. It was a different group than the one we ended up doing. And he also, first thing I did with Farouk was the first African Primal Rhythm Orchestra, which was a bunch of musicians from the area exploring, you know, free music and the like, and some compositions. And actually, I went to the Masjid al-Salam to learn something about Islam that didn't have nothing to do with, you know, Elijah and them. You know, I wanted to know the real deal. And that's where I met Farouk. It didn't have nothing to do with the music. And he said, oh, you play bass? Oh, you should come over. You know, it was like that.
And then, so how does, when you start working with Farouk, and you have Tani as your
well, that was much
ace.
later. There was a bigger group before Tani joined
between
the
the trio and the quintet that we kind of
Yeah, we had a big group with harp, flute and harp. We had Elrita Dodds on clarinet, bass clarinet. We had Kafi Nasuma on harp and flute. And it was quite, two percussionists, Sadiq Bey and Hakim, Mubarak Hakim. It was you know, it was strange because at that time, people didn't know what was happening, and we had a long stay at a place called Cobb's Corner, where we were able to change it from a really jacked up bar where people were fighting every night to a real music room. And I think out of all the bands that were playing there at that time, we were the ones that changed the vibe of the place. We had professors coming in from Wayne State, and, because Farouk was a principal composer. When Threadgill and Roscoe and them would talk about Detroit, talk about different composers from different cities, they get to Detroit, they talk about Farouk, and then they go to another city to talk about. That's how important Farouk's writing was and his vision. And Detroit was such an incredible scene if you were a rhythm section player. I mean, I remember playing with J.C. Hurd and Griot Galaxy at the same time.
Right. So then, what were some of the, you've talked about it some before, but what were some of the kind of musical goals inside? Because you guys were working so much with meter in that band.
Well, like I said, that's one of the hookups from Chicago. Tiny came with a lot of odd meter stuff from Phil Coran and the North Indian modes, and this is what you played that goes to that part of the body. This is the time of the day you're supposed to play it. Phil Coran had it all hooked up like that. So he already had the odd meter stuff that we'd been trying to do some odd meters, but it didn't really become easy until we had that. Farouk would tell people, he said, I had an idea for a tune. I would just say, I think the drums should play 7. A drum should play 7, the bass should play 5, but they should have the same one. He said he'd look over and we would just start doing it. And it happened quite a bit because of all of the things that we had done together. We were playing with jazz groups and funk bands, and
and Tani.
Yeah, so that's what made us really solid because we think that it's all, if it's going to be, I don't want to sound like the Stanley Crouch of space music, but if it's going to be jazz, if it's going to be something that comes from the black thing, then it's supposed to come from the black thing. Some of the European avant-garde leaves me cold because they ain't got that thing. Gilmore told me that here's a thing that goes off in his head when they're playing this space, and because of that pulse. It's still, if you ask me, it's still swinging. Right.
Well, since you mentioned Gilmore, so what takes you to Philly to move into the house?
Wonderful bass player named Ray McKinney. People know the history of Detroit. They know about the McKinney family, Harold McKinney, Ray McKinney.
Galen McKinney.
I'm looking around for, that generation. They're like jazz royalty in Detroit. I'm looking around for people old enough to know what I'm talking about. And so Harold was playing with Kenny Burrell that night on the same gig as Sun Ra, the Arkestra, and he knew I really loved Sun Ra.
This is at the Ann Arbor Jazz and Blues Fest?
And so I went up there with him early at the sound check, and I got a chance to meet the cats. And so lo and behold, Sun Ra didn't have a bass player. Since Ray was this world-class jazz bass player, they went to Ray and said, hey, Ray, Sun Ra don't have a bass player. And the first thing Ray did was, no, this is the cat that's supposed to, he probably already knows the tunes, And so I went home and got my bass and played that night with Sun Ra. Then, the next 2 days later or so, he called me to come to Chicago. Then we finished the tour, and then I moved down to Philly to stay with the house.
And how long were you at the house for?
Year, maybe a little more. But that was the music, because he didn't really sleep at night. That's when he wrote. He would take cat naps during the day, but the funny story was when I first walked into the house and he's sitting there eating, playing, cussing out somebody and telling me where to set up all at the same time. And he's playing some standard that I probably should have known but didn't. And the first mistake I made was, hey, Sonny, Sunrise, what are the changes? And he just looked at me and kept playing. So I start fumbling around trying to figure out the tune. The exact moment I thought I knew what I was doing, he stopped the man. He said, when you didn't know what you were doing, it was wonderful. Now that you think you know the song, it's most displeasing. And he dogged me for about 20 minutes, about using your intuition. You're not going to catch up on 30 years of my music thinking you got to, Right.
And so how, during that experience, what were some of the things that you took away from the rest of the band? Because, here was the difference. Gilmore's still living in the house,
yeah,
right?
Gilmore was in the house. A lot of the main guys were in the house. Marshall owned the house, but he lived a few blocks away in another house. So when we played at the house, it was only the cats. It wasn't like some of the gigs in different cities where people just kind of show up. I mean, I would show up when he would come around, you know. So it was different music. We'd rehearse it, and then sometimes he'd record it, sometimes he wouldn't. And it was music that I can't even explain some of it. I mean, stuff that changes you. You know, the music changes you. And you know what it's for. He used to say, people think all I'm doing is trying to play music, you know. But he's talking about orienting the rhythm of the planet and making sure folks, you know, maintaining an ethnic structure, developing our own mythology, the things that every other society can rely on, they took from us, that we had to rebuild, you know. Because we're very dubious as a people sometimes. We're of this, but we're of that. We're African, but we're not. We're American, but we're not. You know, so he would say we have a chance to be something the world has never seen yet, coming from the unknown.
To create a new myth structure.
Yeah, to create it.
Yeah. And so then after that...
I mean, the only names where you know as us is, you know, Shamika Ray Shed or something. If you got a Muslim name, they can't tell who you are. If you got an African name, they can't tell who you are. But if your name is, you know, Levante or some shit, then they know, oh, this is... Right. That's kind of messed up if you ask me. I'm talking. I knew if I talked long enough, it would happen.
So then you go back to Detroit,
and I came out, and I came into the music coming out of the Republic of New Africa and
right.
the Pan African Congress, and I started playing kind of late, and I just considered the music as part of the struggle, and the message that we were trying to transmit. It wasn't, okay, I think I'm gonna be a musician.
As movement
It
work.
was in another way to say, and record the things that we were feeling. So it was part of that.
Huh.
And that was a mixture. It was a blessing. Starting that late, one thing is I had listened to music for a long time. I didn't start playing and didn't have to find myself. I already knew what I liked and who I liked, and you know.
And what were some of your listening habits?
My first jazz record I bought was Ascension. And my second one was Atlantis. I walked into Vaughn's bookstore and saw this cat standing there behind this organ with these orbits and stuff. And I didn't know nothing about Sun Ra. That's why, how'd you get hip to it? Because I looked. And I just grabbed that record, and it turned out to be Atlantis, which is still one of my favorites. So, and I didn't vibe on this stuff. It wasn't something I created for myself. Whatever I needed, the next cat was there somehow. I mean, I really felt like I was plugged into some things. You know, mostly saxophone players. Kamal Kenyatta, who Grammy for Gregory Porter stuff, was the cat that taught me my music fundamentals. And he was the saxophone player then. Now he plays more piano because he does more arrangements and things. And then Farouk, you know, Roscoe, David. Most of my stuff, except for like Jerry, was all saxophone players. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then so after living in Philly, you go back to Detroit?
Yeah. And then we start really putting our stuff to the metal, you know. That's when
Griot.
That's when the band really started to get happening.
Right. And then Griot ends with Farouk's motorcycle accident.
Well, we tried to
correct?
keep it going, but it wasn't really happening because I wanted to keep Farouk's music out there. You know, people were calling us that you can't get on the phone to book us and stuff, and for various reasons, you know. We couldn't, you know, get it together in that time. But then right when we were starting to get happening, boom, the motorcycle accident. And
Right.
took him a long time to recover. And
Yeah. And so then about that time you start doing you're still playing kind of straight ahead and bop.
if you're in Detroit and you're working, you're playing with everybody. I play with all the best big bands. I play with, later on, I played with Martha and the Vandellas. I played with the, Supremes. I mean, if you're in Detroit, it was that kind of town. If you wanted to play the blues, they were real blues people. If you wanted to play, straight up rock, they were real rock people. Except they ran us out of rock. That's a whole nother story.
Right.
About how black folks got ran out of rock. I mean, ballet has done a better job of integrating than. But the first music I played was rock.
Right.
We had rock bands, black rock bands, everybody straight up rock, and you talk to anybody that had that element in their music and you'll see that there was a a significant structure involved in making sure, no, this is not black music,
Right, right.
you know.
Part of the reason to end the set today with Machine Gun.
I just remember Hendrix Funkadelic Sun Ra, Hendrix Funkadelic Sun Ra, like all day, Hendrix Funkadelic Sun Ra.
Right. So then, since you mentioned Geri, I want to just talk about Geri at least briefly. When and where do you meet her, and how does that relationship become established?
She was playing music in high school. I remember her back then, and she was around town writing. There are some piano players and some composers that really have a Detroit way of, even though it's not dissimilar, like Jerry, Rod Williams. You know, they have unique music, but it still sounds like Detroit. And it's simply the way if you agree about how time feels and playing together that way. She wrote a lot of music that seems difficult, except you could understand it. Like if I have to think about it too much, to me there's something wrong going on. Even if it's complicated, I should feel like there's a reason for it. There's more reasons. I tell somebody not that long ago that there should be another reason to play something other than it's possible.
Right.
You know, based on what's going on with the rest of the group.
And so you're working with Geri for how long?
She had that big group, and then she moved to New York after that. But, you know.
And do you go to New York then, too?
No. I went to New York when Rod had to, his wife had some visa issues, had to go back to Japan for a year. And I I sublet it for them for stupidly low money on 12th and 2nd. Like, you couldn't possibly get a place for that kind of bread now. I mean, you'd kill for it.
Rod Williams or Rod Hicks?
Rod Williams.
Okay.
And
Just to get our
that
Rod
let
straight.
me go to New York. Then I moved to Queens, and then I stayed the longest I spent out there was in Long Beach, New York, and I really missed the boardwalk and all that stuff.
Right. And so what does the work become when you're in New York?
Well, I was still going out.
With who?
Depends on what year. James and then David.
Right. And
So I mean, I worked in New York, but if you live in New York and you're depending on what you get in New York, you might have a problem. I knew people working all the time couldn't pay their bills. I mean, that's just how expensive it is living there, you know.
But you were on the road a lot.
I was on the road a lot, and so even when I moved back to Detroit, I was still on the road a lot. So I mean, if you're hooked up, you can pretty much live where you want. But if you're depending on the scene that you're in, you know, it's a battle, because people want to look at you a certain way if they know they can get to you.
Right.
Oh, I just saw him down there on such and such for, you know, it was a $5 cover. What are you talking about? I back in my drinking days, I was at a gig and downtown, and the girl was arguing about a $5 cover. And I said, look, baby, there's 5 of us in the band. That means if you come in here, I get $1 from you. Now, I think if you stay, I'm worth $1 from you. And I tell you what, I'm not speaking for the rest of the band, but I will give you back your $1. Come see me. I will give you back like $5. Because the clubs, they would try to get people in, so no cover. As soon as they charge a cover, they stop coming.
Right.
You know.
In the interest of time, I wanted to open it up to questions. And I'll repeat the questions for the sake of the video. Do people have questions? Josh? So the question was from Josh Harlow. Sun Ra said, I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to give up your death. What does that mean to you?
That I don't have a direct quote from Sun Ra on. Just a bunch of things I remember him saying to me directly about music and the cosmos and mythology, how religion is actually upgraded if it becomes a mythology. Because it is a mythology anyway. If you think there's any real chance that the historic Jesus is anything like the one we believe in, I've got some seaside property in Arizona for you, you know. So we've developed a mythology around it. For instance, if you learn Aesop, you don't waste time arguing about, well, a fox can't talk to a hen. You go straight to the moral of the thing. So if you treat the Bible like a moral code, you're okay. If you treat it like a history book or a science treatise, I feel bad for you. It wasn't made for that. The literalism that we tried to ascribe to it was unknown to the writers at the time. They weren't even trying to do that. So these people who believe they know where the ark was and all this mess. But the question is, sorry. He was a master of words and what he would say about words. And the thing I remember him saying about death was that he said freedom is death. Because he said, I've never had any freedom. I never knew anybody else who did. The only freedom you have is when you die. So when people say that to you, they're talking about death. He said something about truth in the same way, that truth is simply the facts. And if you look at the world, the facts are bad. So if you're after the truth, you're after something bad. We need something better, the myth. That the truth is simply the most we've accomplished, the best we've done so far. The myth is what we're aspiring to. And you can read Joseph Campbell for that same message about the hero sagas of all these great cultures, And people live on myth whether they think they do or not. They'll take something and turn it into one. He said there's the myth of white supremacy. He said it's a lie, but look at what they got to show for it. And look at these wonderful black leaders who, after the truth, they all hit the dirt. And past, he said the past is dead. And so if you're living in the past, and that's why when they say people have died, they have passed. Because he was phonetic. He didn't care about the spelling. So if you're living in that, you're living in death. Like ideas are death, materialism, death. You're worshiping something that's not alive, something that can't really give you anything back. So it's only still present if you feed it. I mean, he would have visions and during the day and stuff. So it was really an important part of my stuff. I thought I knew a little bit of stuff, and then I never met anybody who knew more about the Bible, for instance, than Sun Ra, which was surprising. The closest thing to the living history of this music there ever was. He arranged for Fletcher Henderson, and he took the music into outer space. So, I mean, I can't. When the jazz police have a problem with Sun Ra, I say, you don't understand at all. At all. I never knew anybody who knew more about music. I never knew anybody who knew more about the Bible than Sun Ra. Coming out of Alabama at his age. Whew.
Time for one more. Tyler?
What do you practice and how do you practice it?
The question is, what do you practice and how do you practice it?
I try to stick to some things, but I have to be honest. When I don't have a lot of stuff to do, it's really hard for me to sit down and just do, There's some fundamentals I make sure of just to make sure I can actually physically play the instrument, but I feel like I'm all like during the pandemic when we were at home, I had so much time, and I got so little done because I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I didn't have anywhere to do it. I'm not proud of that fact, and I know other people. I said, I'm gonna come out of this playing those box suites, and So I make sure to do certain fundamentals and try to just to make sure I can physically play the instrument, and then I just work on whatever music I'm playing.
Did you have one?
Yeah, I just got a question. So I've seen a lot of performances with you and David Murray over the years. So many different ensembles, West African, straight jazz. A few comments just about the takeaways or some of the major.
Well, all in all,
I got to put the question in
sorry.
for the video.
Right.
Just if you could comment on your experience with David Murray, on the variety of ensembles and music that happened over that period of time.
He's going to figure out a way to stay busy. He's going to have 9 projects going. If there are 3 gigs left on Earth, one of them is his gig. I mean, I never met anybody with that kind of, and that curious. I mean, he's one of those musicians where some of his best friends are the literary giants. You know, they're musicians who only do music. You know, he's way more rounded than that, and so I'm Baraka, and we worked with A.V. Brooks and stuff, and just amazing stuff. So a lot of it is just out of his it just incessant curiosity about stuff. What I liked about David when we did those different kinds of projects was he made sure it was still his thing. I've done a lot of projects with like West African musicians where they still only play what they play, and I got to figure out all kinds of stuff that fits what they do. No, he's going to do his thing. They're going to have to also make some adjustments. So I thought that was kind of hip. But in my whole time, starting from Kamal, Farouk, and Roscoe, and I've only known really, J.C. Hurd. What a person just to know. Just incredible band leaders. I can't think of a better situation than the situation I grew up playing in, with the generosity of the elders who were there, who had time to sit you down and make sure you knew this and knew that. And I couldn't think. I'm talking about you could be in a funk band today and play swing tomorrow and be in a big band the next day, and I was doing all of that at the same time. So you get an idea about how the whole thing fits. And if you're a rhythm section person and that's not a specialist, because I've seen people make this mistake when they play multiple genres, is you have to know immediately, okay, what is it that makes this that? And how do I express myself in that and still keep that what it is? You do a Motown gig and somebody's trying to play polychords on it. You're like, that's not the language of this music. And I never felt constricted by any of those parameters. Only challenged that, okay, well, how can I still be me, but do what needs to be done in this thing? Not only that, if you do that, you'll work.
So I have a follow-up to that, which is, since you talked about both Ra's brain and vividness and David Murray, could you say something about Roscoe and his work ethic and his approach? Because I know you've talked to me a lot about it.
The entire AACM changed the world, and all of these jazz police who think that's not jazz or have another vibe on that way of thinking about music, they're entitled to treat music the way they want to treat it and go for the stuff that they like. But they first of all got to give it up for these cats opening up Europe for everybody. Those are the guys that did it. They opened it up for everyone. They not only changed music, but they changed the whole idea of what is sound. A remarkable contribution coming out of this city from people like Muhal and Roscoe. And of course, meeting Roscoe at the age I was and being able to learn from him was just incredible. The stuff that was important, the stuff he didn't care about. Remarkable band. He always knew what he wanted. He was always writing, always growing.
That seems like a good place to end. Always writing, always growing. Thank you.